my friends. It's a great day here in Berkeley Springs, here in West Virginia. We've got a marvelous fall, sunny, 73-degree fall day, and it was glorious to be around today. Here it's just starting in the fall, and the leaves are starting to turn down here. And there's a lot of things that are changing, not just the leaves. And that's what I wanted to chat with you a little bit about today. We're on the verge of some amazing kind of things that are coming downstream. Every indication suggests that. And let me read you one of them. As you know, if you follow some of the work of our work, you know that we're interested in, we like and we follow the work of Martin Armstrong. Martin Armstrong is an economist down in Florida who has developed a computer program 40 years ago based upon the cyclical nature of how everything in this kind of reality works. That is kind of unprecedented in terms of not only its accuracy, because of it's never been wrong in 40 years, but also in terms of the kind of effectiveness that it's had, because it follows the stock market and financial things, and it's primarily put together for that, but it also has geopolitics and climate and other such things. And so it's pretty obvious that you can kind of look around without any particular kind of deep insight or understanding, and know that things are just coming unglued all over the place. And I was impressed, and we've tried to, we've tried to follow this a good bit at the Arlington Institute, and we do a lot of things that we produce here that generate awareness about these big events that are coming and so on. But it's a good time, I think, to take a big overview about where this is and where it seems to be going. Marty Armstrong, his computer for 40 years has said that there is going to be, between 2025 and 2027, a global civil war, which I take to be an uprising, a general uprising by people against their governments across the planet. And if you buy that idea, or at least you hold that concept, that scenario in your mind, you can certainly look around and say there's a lot of stuff that's pointing directly toward that happening. What his computer also says is that starting in maybe January or February of next year, 2023, that there is going to be the beginning of World War III. And you can also see kind of the contributing factors coming, blowing up the pipelines and so on. This is the 7th of October, and so of 2022. And so just a week ago, I guess it was, they blew up these pipelines in the Baltic and the Nord Stream pipelines. But this is what showed up today from Martin Armstrong. The headline is called "The Rising Risk of Nuclear War in 2023." And he ends the answering of questions that he's from a reader or a subscriber. And it says, the computer projects 2023 as the year of political hell. January is a key period, as will be April of 2023. I would not starting laurels for Ukraine just yet. He's responding to a question about the future of Ukraine. This is not over, and the worst is yet to come. The threat of nuclear war rises in 2023. Now, Marty is one of two kind of sources that I monitor and I follow as being kind of independent and based upon some kind of, if you will, scientific base. Armstrong is very clear that he does not interpret anything or overlay what the computer says with his interpretation, because he says, all I tell you is what the computer says, and the computer's never been wrong in 40 years. Alternatively, Cliff High from halfpasthuman.com has got a program that he calls the WebBot program that he developed, which scans the whole internet with billions and billions of web bots that are looking for changes in language. And the underlying theory is, or the notion is, that all humans are psychic, and that whether we understand it or not, what we do is we pick up these kind of waves of energy from big perturbations in the future, and they come in, and how it manifests itself is that each of us starts to use language in a slightly different way, and new terms start to show up and it's not explicit about what's going to happen. It's kind of implicit, or it's subtle. But if you monitor all of this, you can see the emergence of these ideas that come in a variety of kind of components of language. He does this in 6 different languages, I think. And that's it ends up being rather interestingly predictive as well. For instance, he had the corona thing 3 years before it showed up, but he mistook it as some kind of a sun event because it was corona and it was not coronavirus. And so there he has an interpretation kind of interface in between what he's doing and what he says and what he thinks. But Cliff High, in terms of looking into this future, has for a good time now essentially characterized what we're going to see in the coming months is a near-death experience. He says the kind of language that's coming out of his analysis suggests that that the coming year or two, at least, is going to be just extraordinary in terms of its disruption and turbulence and uncertainty and other such things. Both of these sources confirm what I believe is that we're on the verge of the greatest change in the history of the planet, or certainly the known history of the planet, I guess. In a very, very short time, something really quite dramatic and multidimensional, multifaceted is all going to turn over. And in the process, literally, Martin Armstrong says that by 2030 or so, that there will be no United States. It'll be sooner than that. As a matter of fact, the United States of America will, as well as presumably a bunch of other countries, will all decompose because of the disruption that they've gone through. And he says in North America, by 2032, there will be 5 or 6 different independent countries that are presumably across both Canada, both Canada and Mexico, as well as the United States. And so if you just sit with that for a minute and suggest that the uprising is 2027, and within 5 years, you've got 5 or 6 new countries, that is wild and crazy in terms of the upheaval and the change that happened. And that's just the underlying steady state kind of track. And it has nothing to do with aliens coming up and what they might do. And it has nothing to do with what might happen from solar flare or any number of other possibilities that are more than just passing, ideas. That there is really some really good, interesting science that suggests that this convergence of all of these things that all coming at the same time that is going to make this an amazing kind of period of time. So here at the Arlington Institute, we've always thought about ourselves and considered ourselves to be facilitators of this new world. We're trying to understand how you get from here to what the new world is. And in that regard, we talk about what alternative worlds, we talk about scenarios and things, what other alternative worlds could come out, could emerge out of all of this change, so that you've got an idea about where we're going. We talk about how what might happen between now and then to kind of precipitate each of the different kind of world views that we think about. And thirdly, we talk about how you prepare yourself, how you might prepare yourself. This is for all of this change, because this is nothing less than the emergence of a new human, literally a new version of the species. This is about an extraordinary, epic kind of change in terms of expanded awareness and consciousness, and any number of other things that allow the human beings who embrace and engage in that track to be able to do amazing kind of things and become somebody amazing that allows the beginning of the platform, the architecture of a new world. So it's a new human that's going to produce a new world, and the new world is a new world that any number of ancient and esoteric and spiritual sources all say 1,000 years, and in some cases 15,000 years of peace. So it's an amazing kind of transition. And if you even think of that kind of idea a little bit, what you immediately come to the conclusion says a world where it's like a whole lot of peace does not look like this one, because this one is really messed up. And so there's clearly going to be a huge kind of disturbance and reorganization between now and then. So what we try to do here at the Arlington Institute is to try to generate awareness about some of these things that are coming downstream, in the same way I just talked to you about Martin Armstrong and what he's saying is coming, because we're convinced that if you're aware of something and you've thought about it, then you decrease the likelihood that you will be afraid when it happens. If you haven't, I mean, fear comes from things you haven't thought about, right? Haven't been confronted with before. You don't know how to respond. And if you wait and you don't think about things, particularly in this time of this extraordinary change, you certainly need to have, anticipate somewhat what's coming downstream. This extraordinary kind of change, if you haven't thought about it, then you end up being confronted by wave after wave of big events that are surprising. And when you get surprised, you're out of time, and you're out of money, and you're out of ideas, and you get driven into fear. And fear makes you ineffective in any way. You don't think logically, all of it. So there's a giant argument here for not being ignorant about what's going on, but being aware of it. Then the issue becomes, well, in the face of all of this kind of stuff coming, how do you become aware of it without becoming fearful of it? And I'll come back in a minute and we'll talk about that. But this is a common kind of issue. I got a couple of emails the other day from somebody suggesting all that we do is we promote fear porn. They said, you talk about a solar event, or you talk about the nuclear war, or you talk about whatever, and all it does is generate fear in me. And so how is that any different than anybody else? Well, that's an interesting kind of notion, because we all kind of process the reality in a different way. And we get, in a sense, we got to get a chance to choose how we see things. I've told the story about years ago. I was in Chicago. We lived in Chicago, and I had a friend. He was a black man. He was a very successful guy, a mortgage banker. And he and I were once standing on Michigan Avenue, if you know Chicago, big major avenue that goes down the lakefront. And, we both had suits on. It was lunchtime. We were obviously kind of business types or some other kind of thing. And we were trying to flag a cab. And both of us were waving at the cabs that came by. And a cab came by and didn't slow down, and it kept going. And he turned to me and he said, "He didn't stop because I'm black." And it just took me by surprise, because I literally, as he went by and kept going, said, "Oh, he's probably going to lunch, or he's on his way to another call," which is commonly what happens with taxi cabs in big cities. And it was amazing to me that I could be standing right next to him, looking at the same thing that happened and interpreting it in a fundamentally different kind of way. And it kind of indelibly kind of imprinted on me the subjectivity of in the way in which we all interpret and see reality, and the ability literally to, if you want to, see things in quite different ways than what other people might see it. And that's important in the context of the larger context in which we're talking about here, because as these big events, I mean, you're not going to get big change without big change. Come on. I mean, that's the way it works. And if you see it all, if you see any kind of change and disturbance as being threatening or fearful, then, I mean, that's one way to look at it, I guess. If all you want is everything to be light and love and happiness and sunshine and no storms for the rest of your life, then you can look at all of these kinds of events as being threatening and fearful and so on. But it's kind of like, we just 3 days or 4 days ago had this big hurricane that went across Florida. And if you were living down there in Florida and trying to figure out kind of what you should do, and you were following the weather, and the weatherman or weather girl, is that what they call them? I guess weather woman said, this big hurricane is coming, and it's a class 4 or whatever it is, and the winds is 150 miles an hour, and you better get out of town, or whatever they said in terms of suggesting what's going to happen. I mean, there's a couple of ways you can respond to that. I have a friend that was down there, and he said, well, we looked around and we looked at it and decided it wasn't going to be as bad as they were trying to make it to be. And we were right. And the thing kind of went over to the side to us and didn't come over the top of us. And so we made the right decision. On the other hand, you could look at the whole thing, presumably, maybe some did, and say, oh, this is all fear porn, right? And they're all just trying to get us all excited, and I don't know, politics, whatever, for other reason. Or you could look at it and say, well, that's good information to have. I think we'll head up 100 miles north and stay overnight and get out of the middle of it. Anyway, there's a variety of ways that you can look at what this all has, and these kinds of things that are coming up, and the notion that it's fearful and that it is disruptive, and is your choice. You get to make those kinds of decisions. I mean, in the face of all of this change that we talked about here, you can look at this and say, wow, there's a chance that the whole thing is going to change. There's going to be a new world that comes out of the back end of this. And how in the world do we adapt and rise to the occasion and be part of the solution? rather than being driven by the waves into the rocks, right? You can surf this wave rather than just being destroyed by it. And as a matter of fact, the fundamentals about how this human experience operates is that we are daily confronted with options and situations that are all presented to us as a way of coming up with the right decision in that kind of situation that then continues to slowly kind of bias us toward making better and better decisions that represent the essence of who we are and the well-being in the world and all the other kind of things, rather than being driven by the kind of the real fear porn that's being generated by the media and everything else around to the kind of futures that they're trying to sell. And so what I'm trying to say here is that there's an important kind of aspect of all of this thing about how you approach all of this change, because it looks like it's just going to be huge. And if you don't, for instance, have some kind of an underlying sense that there is direction and it's intelligent design and benignness, love, if you will, underneath this whole process, and this is about the evolution of humanity. Again, we need to go through this process to kind of rise up and come up to another point of view where we see ourselves and our potentials in quite a different way, and you become a broader kind of awareness, expanded awareness, higher levels of consciousness and such. I mean, all of these kind of other levels of being are the product of moving from where you are to there. And we're given all these options and these situations and these problems as ways in which to, in fact, learn the kind of evolutionary kind of process to move us up that way. Or you can sit there and say, I don't want to talk about that. All I want is light and love, and don't tell me about negative things. And then I would suggest to you that you're setting yourself up to really be surprised and really become fearful. And when the water doesn't work, and when the food runs out, and when all of the kind of things that come from big disruptive situations, and if you haven't thought about them a little bit and prepared, then you got a set of problems that are your own. You've generated them yourself, or you allowed them to emerge by yourself because you didn't do anything about it, because you didn't want to think about those kinds of things. So this is a chance to think about, but not emotionally attach yourself to these new things. I mean, they're talking, this is Marty Armstrong's thing that, a nuclear war in 2023. Well, you can get all excited and get caught up and generate all kinds of emotions about that, and about what's going to happen and what's going to happen here, and what, and that's the wrong side of that equation. Because when you give emotions to these kinds of ideas, you give strength and power to them. You enable them, as a matter of fact. These images that you generate, and that we all generate in our minds, kind of explicitly or even implicitly, are part of the kind of manifestation process that generates the reality that we live in. And so if you're thinking about that World War III is going to be horrible, then that's what you're going to get. If you think about it from an intellectual point of view and not an emotional attachment, and you say, that's going to be all disruptive, but there's a new world that's going to come out of this. And so what we need to do is reorient ourselves, get in a place where we're on the track to the new world, because there's nothing you can do about the fact if there's going to be World War III. I mean, you need to kind of learn how to deal with this yourself. So there's a really relatively easy way through all of this. If you start to see the world as a learning experience on the way to something else, and that you need to find the way personally that you can kind of navigate and work your way out that thing and not get all caught up in the fear porn that the system, the governments and the media and everything are trying to tell you. Need to be you shouldn't be ignorant. You need to know about those kinds of things, but you treat them at an arm's length, kind of you're watching it. It's like you go to a play or you go to a movie, and you'd be foolish to go to a play and a movie and so consumed with it that you came out of the play and the movie and you thought that it was real, and that you changed your whole life, or you destroyed your life, all based upon the idea that the movie or the play that you went to was real. And that's the point here. It's just this kind of arm's length kind of observer kind of position that we need to take with all of this. So there's a wonderful lot of things to learn in this whole thing. It's an extraordinary time. And those of us who are engaged and forward kind of leaning into this have an amazing opportunity to literally help build a new world. And so you can either think about what we're all trying to do and make sense of here as I'm very fearful, or you can see it as very hopeful, as the birth of a whole new world and a new humanity, which we choose to think about and see it as an extraordinary kind of opportunity to do some really good stuff. So I hope that you find that helpful, and I'll look forward to talking to you next time.